And there's victory across the set of all games. And the victory that you attain across the set of all games isn't winning all the games, it's being invited to play all the games. And so if you play fair, then you're playing a metagame. And the metagame is how to win across the set of all games. And so if you teach your child how to behave properly, then they always get invited to play. And that makes them winners. And that's that. And so if you understand that, you understand something phenomenally important about the emergence of morality. You know, because people, moral relativists in particular, think that morality is relative, you know, and of course human beings are diverse, just like languages are diverse, and there's more than one playable game, but there's not really more than one playable metagame. It's like you're either the kind of person that other people want to play with, or you're not. And if you're not the kind of person that other people want to play with, then you're a loser. It's as simple as that. And that's true of all cultures. They might be playing different individual games within their culture, undoubtedly they are, but the set of all games that they play is still common across cultures. That's part of what makes us human. And then you could say as well, we're actually evolved to detect people who are good at playing the set of all possible games. And we actually know that. That's not theoretical. We know, for example, some things are easy to remember and some things are hard to remember, you know. Here's something that's easy to remember. You play with someone and they cheat. Man, you will remember that. That's like in your mind. That's not going anywhere. And so you're great at detecting cheaters and you remember. And that's because you can't trust a cheater, and you shouldn't invite a cheater to play a game with you because they might cheat. And so that's part of the innate morality system. You remember cheaters because they aren't good at playing the metagame. And of course you're evolved. Of course you're adapted to the metagame because you're the product of this immense evolutionary history, right? And whoever your ancestors were, which is an unbroken string of successful reproducers going back 3.5 billion years. You think about that. Every single one of your ancestors successfully reproduced. It's mind-boggling. The chances against that are so, it's billions to one, and here you are, the line of 3.5 billion years of success. The whole world was trying to kill you that whole time, and here you are. It's like, but you know, you're still only going to last about 80 years. So, but that's, you know, still, you know, good for you. So anyways, there were lots of games that your ancestors were playing across that immense span of time. Many, you know, lizard games and tree dweller games and crustacean games, you know, that huge set of games. And you're adapted to win across those games, all of them. And that's built into you, man. That's your central human nature. That's what makes you social. And it's not some mere cultural construct. Quite the contrary. It's so deeply embedded in you. It's what you are. All right, so, well, this is a story. It's a game too. That's another way of thinking about it, you know. Well, like, that's a Monopoly game. Well, what's the frame? Well, that's the rules of the game. And why do you accept them? Well, it's kind of arbitrary, right? It's like, that happens to be the rules. Hockey has different rules. Basketball has different rules, but what they share is that they have rules. Okay, so there's a frame, that's the rules, and then within the frame there's a goal, and the goal is whatever the rules dictate. You know, it's usually the construction of a hierarchy of success within a frame. And so that's what you play, and so you play Monopoly, and it's like, well, we'll accept the rules, that's the social contract, and then we'll each try to win, and that'll be fun. We find that amusing, and if you lose, what do you say? Well, you say, well, there's always another game. And so that's great. So if you have that attitude and you play fair, then it doesn't matter that much that whether you win or lose, although you still want to try to win because otherwise you're not a good player, but you accept defeat gracefully because you can play again. And you'll win some and you'll lose some, and so that's not so bad, you know. And even if you lose, well, maybe you learn something, and you're doing a lot more than one thing while you're playing Monopoly. You know, you're having a conversation and learning how to interact with people and learning how to regulate your emotions. And so even if you lose, if you have any sense, you win. And if your kids have any sense, they know that. And so that way you buffer them against defeat. It's like, yeah, you know, next time. It's like, it's okay. And you should try, but it's okay. And that's useful information for people to know. So, all right, so you're always in one of these little frameworks and there's just no getting out of it. So, and that's because you know, at any given moment. This is like, it's like field theory. There used to be psychological theories that talked about the field of human experience, something like that, and this is kind of what that is. This is a field, and basically what happens is you parse out a little part of the world, say, and so an amount you can handle. So let's say it has some duration. You're not aiming at something 50 years in the future. It's because how the hell are you going to do that? There's too many variables, you know. So you're aiming at some handleable amount of time, and you posit a goal in there, and you plot your route, and then that tells you what's up and tells you what's down, because up moves you towards the goal and down moves you away from the goal, and that sets up your motivational framework so that you have something worth attaining. You know, that's a really interesting thing to know too, is like, why have a goal? Well, it's easy. No goal, no positive emotion. Because you experience positive emotion by noticing that you're moving towards a goal. And so if you don't have a goal, well, you can't have any positive emotion. So you better have a goal. And so you might say, well, what should the goal be? Well, we could start by saying, well, any goal is better than none. And then we might say, well, it should be a goal that other people will let you pursue, because otherwise it's going to be kind of difficult, and maybe they'll be even happy to help you pursue it. That would even be better. And maybe it's a goal that would enable you to learn how to pursue other goals while you pursue that goal. Boy, that would really be good. And so you can see that your goal is parameterized, but that doesn't mean that any old goal works. It means there's some goals that work nicely and some not so nicely. There are playable games and non-playable games. That's a good way of thinking about it. And you want to have a playable game, and there's a lot of them. Lawyer, plumber, you know, actor, whatever. They're playable games, and it's not obvious which one's better, but it's certainly obvious which ones are sustainable and which ones are worse. And so there's a set of playable games, and you need to extract from that set of playable games a game that suits you. And that would be partly due to your temperament, you know, because extroverted people want to play an extroverted game, and highly neurotic people want to play a safe game, and agreeable people want to play a generous game, and disagreeable people want to play a game that's highly competitive so they can win, and you know, fine, but they're all within the realm of playable games, and that means they're socially acceptable as well. And so that means it isn't just arbitrary, it isn't just relative what you decide to do. It's heavily parameterized. There's a set of playable games, and it's large. The set is large, but there are commonalities within it, and that's why there are commonalities. That's why morality has a common basis fundamentally, and so that's partly what we're trying to investigate, is like, what's up? What does up mean? What does it mean? Is there such a thing? Now, one thing to remember is that if you don't erect a hierarchical structure with something to aim at, you got no positive motivation, because you experience positive motivation in relationship to a goal, not from attaining the goal. That's satisfaction. And besides, it's fleeting. You know perfectly well. You graduate from university, poof, next day you have a problem, which is what do you do next? And that's a tough problem. It's not like you've solved your problems by winning that game. You just introduced the problem of having to introduce another game. So it's unreliable as a source of positive emotion, but what's reliable is you set a goal and you try to attain it, and then that gives your life, that literally provides your life with meaning. That's what meaning is. Now it's more than that, but that's what it is. And so then you might ask yourself, well, what's a really good goal? Well, that's what we're trying to figure out. What's a really good goal? And now, okay, so you got that. So now I'm going to walk through, at least partly through, we'll see how far we get, I'm going to walk through Pinocchio with you, because that's what the movie's about. And it's hard to say how it came about. Like, it was written, a story by a guy named Collodi, C-O-L-L-O-D-I. It's quite a bit different, that story, the written one, from the Disney version. The Disney version was a product of the collaboration of geniuses of animation, essentially. So they were artistic geniuses, great at capturing motion and emotion and all of that, be stellar at that, and imaginative, tremendously imaginative, but collectively imaginative. And so they put together a collective product. And you might say, well, how did they do that exactly? It's like, well, they were good storytellers. And what does that mean? Well, it means you know the story that works and the story that doesn't. And maybe partly what you do is you kind of think out a story and you think, well, what if this happens? And well, maybe this should happen. Oh, that's the thing. Oh, that would work. It's like the little flash of inspiration, right? It's like you got a piece of the puzzle that fits. You think, yeah, that will work there. And then you talk to the other people and you generate ideas, and someone says, well, what if they do this? And everyone goes, no, that's just not believable. No one's going to buy that. And someone else has a little revelation. They say, well, you know, it makes some sense somehow if they do this. And everybody goes, oh yeah, that really works. It's like, why? Why? Well, you don't know. You don't know why it works. But it works because it's the right story. And so what does that mean? Well, it's kind of associated with this metagame idea. You know, it's like there's a story that you should be acting out that works across games, and you have an inkling of it, you have a notion of it, you have a vague apprehension of it. It's sort of built into you. That's archetype. That's an archetype. And so then when you read a story that works, you're just entranced by it. And you all know that. You go to a movie and it's a great movie and it's like you're just blown away. You know, a movie can pull you in and turn you into one of the screen characters and like run you through a huge set of emotions. I saw this movie once about South America. It started with this guy running out of a subway naked, and he didn't know where he was, and it turned out that he had been absconded by the totalitarian death squads, and he couldn't remember anything about himself. And he went back to his village, and basically what happened was that he ended up back in the totalitarian death grip. And it showed how the fascist state had saturated the village completely. And so it was a tragedy, and you could see with every action that this amnestic guy, as he recreated himself and remembered his identity, was going to travel down exactly the same road because nothing had changed. And by the time, I've looked for what that movie was for years, I've never been able to find it again, but when the movie was over, every single person in the theater was crying, and not just a little bit. It was like they were just out of it. It was brilliant, terrifying movie, and that meant there was something right about it, man, and it got people. And you might say, you know, you have dim apprehensions about the world, and some of those are instinctual, and some of those are a consequence of your experience, and it's like the pieces are fragmented, but if you get away from them a long ways, you could see how they fit together, but they're fragmented. And then you go see a story and those pieces go click, 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 and you think, wow, that's how that works out. That's what that means. And that produces that overwhelming emotion. And that's partly how you make yourself transparent to yourself. You know, you go experience a story, you go watch a story, you tell a story, and you start to find out who you are by doing that. My nephew had a dream at one point. Someone made a little animated thing out of it and put it on the internet, which is quite cool. So anyways, he was having night terrors, and he ran around like a little knight, you know, a Knight, K-N-I-G-H-T, knight. And he had a little, you know, armor and a sword, and he'd run around the house with a little knight hat on, being a knight. And he was only like 4 or something, and he'd watched a lot of Disney movies, a lot of movies, so he kind of got the knight idea. He's acting that out, and he was having these terrors at night, right? And so he'd go to bed with his little knight hat and his sword, and he'd put him on his bed, and then at night he'd wake up screaming, and that happened for a very long time. And so when I went to visit, you know, I found out that this was happening, and he had a night terror. So the kid wakes up with night terrors, screaming, but can't remember anything, generally speaking. So anyways, this was happening, and so it happened one day, and I was sitting with him and his family at the breakfast table, and I said, did you have a dream? And he said, oh yes, I had a dream. I said, well, you know, what was your dream? And he said, well, I was out on this field, and I was surrounded by these dwarfs, and they came up to my knees, and they didn't have any arms, they had big feet, and they were covered with hair, and there was a cross shaved at the top of their head, and they were all greasy, and they had huge beaks, and everywhere I went they jumped at me with their beaks, and there was lots of them, and everybody was very quiet after he said this, because it was like, that's why you're screaming at night. It's like, yeah, okay. And and then he said, but at the background there was a dragon, and the dragon would blow out smoke and fire, and then it would turn into these dwarfs. So it's like, man, that kid had a problem, right? It was like, well, what are you going to do? You fight off a dwarf, who cares? It's like, puff, 10 more. That's life, man. That's life. Really, that's the Hydra. You cut off one head, 7 more grow. That's life. Snakes everywhere. And you get rid of one, there'll be more. And so he figured that out. It's a hell of an existential shock when you're 4. And so he's like, he's a knight, he's thinking, what do I do about these dwarfs? Well, there's too many of them, but there's a dragon. Well, so I said, well, what could you do about that? Right? Loaded question. It implies that you could do something about that. Well, he kind of knew that, which is why he was running around like a knight. He kind of figured that out. And he said, well, I get my dad, and I jump up on the dragon, and I poke out both of its eyes with my sword, and then I go right down its stomach to the place where the fire came out, the firebox, and then I'd carve a piece of the firebox out and I'd make a shield. And that would be the end of that. And I thought, wow, good work, kid.